Good morning, friends. Snowy morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. My name is Jean DeVenny, and I use the pronouns she and her, and I am this morning's worship associate. We gather in worship to find meaning and to live more deeply. Worship creates connections within, among, and beyond, calling us to our better selves, calling us to live with wisdom and compassion. So whoever you are, whomever you love, whatever your image of the holy, we are glad you are here. If today is your first time with us, we'd love to get to know you. Right after service, you're invited to our welcoming room, which is located over here at the south entrance to the building. And if you're online, the link to our visitor form is being dropped into the chat right now. You may have noticed that we don't hand out paper copies of our order of service. You can use your phone to access a digital copy by scanning the QR codes that are located around the building. We also have a few large print paper copies that you can request from our ushers. Now, let us take a few moments to greet our neighbors, especially those we don't know yet. So, talk amongst yourselves. And now, Christian will help us light our chalice. We light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, with words adapted from Richard Gilbert. We are, therefore we love. We love, therefore we are. Good job, Christian. Thank you. May we be humble before the wonder of what we dare to create and be bold in how inclusively we love. And now, let us say together the words of our mission, which affirm our shared purpose. By love, we transform ourselves and serve our world.
Thank you, choir, and thank you, Joe and Suzanne, for that musical invitation this morning to open our hearts. My name is Dennis Reynolds. I use he, him pronouns, and it is so very good to be here in the pulpit of my home church. I am honored to be recognized as an affiliated community minister of this congregation, and some of you may have heard I'm now serving on a very part-time basis our sibling congregation in Roseburg, the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist congregation. And some of you have known me for a while, and some of you, who is this guy? Just a brief little background. I was an active lay member of this congregation for many years, and then in my mid-50s, I took the audacious step of going to seminary part-time. And I spent my 60s on the road in a variety of settings, mostly Whidbey Island, Washington, serving as a Unitarian Universalist minister before my wife Suzanne and I retired and came home. This is home. As we center ourselves more deeply, I invite you into worship with words that were shared on many a Sunday morning in this church, this congregation, when we gathered in a building up on the hill. Words shared by my friend, mentor, and minister for 9 years of this congregation, the Reverend Carolyn Colbert, who would say to us on many a Sunday, "We are by our very nature loving and caring people. But sometimes we forget. We come together in church to remember. Come, let us worship and remember together." Right? invite you now into a centering meditation. And it's a meditation of movement. And it's pretty simple. I invite you to simply put your hands open in front of you. Open to receive whatever may come in your life. And then inhale and bring it to your heart and hold it for just a brief time. And then let it go as you exhale so that your hands may be open once again to receive. We're going to take a pause for a moment as we hold and a pause after we exhale. Okay, so let's try it together with words a couple of times, and then we'll try it just in silence. Open, in, hold, and let go. Open, in, hold, and let go. Let's spend a time in silence with hearts, hands, and minds open to receive. I invite you to take one fine cleansing breath in and out. As we move into our ritual time of sharing of joys and sorrows, and we acknowledge that hearts and minds every week may come with challenges and with joys that you wish to share with your beloved community. You're open anytime and invited anytime during or after the service to light a candle over at the tables over on this side or drop a stone in the water. And jot down any words you would like to share in the notebook that's open there. For those of you who are online, the link will be dropped into the chat, and you can leave a message there, or you can log into the church website at any time during the week to the pastoral portal, and ministerial staff and worship associates will be prepared to respond to any needs that you have.
This morning I'm going to be sharing some poetry from Polly Murray. Polly Murray was born in 1910 and died in 1985, one of the most amazing and under-acknowledged people of the 20th century. She was the granddaughter of a slave and the great-granddaughter of a slave owner. Orphaned, she was separated from her 5 siblings and raised by an aunt in North Carolina. She excelled in school and graduated from Hunter College in New York. After being rejected from graduate work at University of North Carolina because of her race, she became a labor organizer. She was arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of a bus in Virginia in 1940. 15 years before Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat in Montgomery, Alabama. The litigation that followed led Polly Murray to law school at historically black Howard University. And then she pursued further study at Harvard Law, but she was rejected because of her gender. But she went on to become a legal scholar whose legal reasoning helped Thurgood Marshall's challenge to segregation in Brown versus the Board of Education. And her work with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the 1970s helped to establish that the concept of equal protection under the law included gender. In 1965, she became the first African American to receive a doctorate of law from Yale. And in 1976, she became the first woman to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. She was a powerful writer and a poet. She achieved all this while struggling with chronic fatigue, depression, and what she described as sexual in-betweenness. In these times, we may have called that non-binary. She has now been introduced to you, and I want you to listen to these poems by the remarkable Polly Murray. The Wanderer. I came with the young sun strong in my limbs and fresh wind in my hair. Spring follows my footsteps. Joy spills from my eyes and peace lies in my breast. 1,000 songs tremble in my brain and my heart is merry with song. Will none heed young love from the hills? No one in the loud city reveal themselves? No friends along these many streets? Will none walk with me in twilight? Must love be desolate this long night? And now her short poem, Tears. 3 times I have known tears. When I loved you, when I lost you, and when you lost yourself.
Love. Love, as many a country song tells us, can be a hurting thing. It can be the sweetness of love can bring tears to our eyes. They come too when love is lost. I also weep when I hear stories of those whose love is questioned, challenged, and demonized. My heart aches when I hear stories of sex and gender-based oppression, discrimination, and violence for all who, in the face of all of that, might be described as potentially losing themselves. Today, in addition to that brief story about Holly Near and the story of Ferdinand and Polly Murray's story, I want to share some more stories. For stories, sad stories, bold stories, happy stories, love stories, all kinds of stories can be important teaching tools. Especially when stories like Polly Murray's are true. Though fictional stories can also offer us important life lessons. Our own experience and our stories are the most important teaching tools, can offer us the best lessons because life continues to gift us with lots of friggin' growth opportunities. Today I want to share some of my own stories about learning about love and hope they might help you remember your own stories. The first story I want to share is not about love, but rather about judgment. And it took place back when I was in middle school. The church of my childhood was a fundamentalist Christian church. There, rather than being empowered by love, I was taught about judgment, about rules, and about who and what one was expected to be. The lesson in that church were more often about exclusion than about inclusion. And those lessons continued at school. It was in middle school that my indoctrination in America's culture of homophobia moved into a more advanced study. It happened the week after I, for the first time in my life, was asked to do my own laundry. Especially my stinky gym clothes. My mother was tired of that. So I did them myself. The problem was my gym clothes included a red sweatshirt. sorting whites and colors had not been part of the lessons I had as yet received. So some can expect what happened. My gym clothes came out significantly tinted. Now, the gray t-shirt and the gray trunks weren't so bad, but my athletic supporter, otherwise known as a jock strap, came out a vivid, bright pink. I was aghast. I insisted to my mother, we got to go to the store right now, Mom. I don't care if it's Monday morning. I'll be late for school, whatever it takes. She says, don't worry, it'll be fine, dear. My mother had obviously never been in a middle school boys' locker room. That week, I was subjected to mercilessness, harassment, and abuse. Some of the boys had perfected the art of the towel snap. You can wrap it tightly and then snap it, and it causes a significant welt on one's backside or hips. And I was subjected to that painful behavior. Yet even more painful were the cruel homophobic taunts. I was mortified. In times, those welts healed and the tint faded from my clothes, and yet the lesson of what was acceptable and what was not were deeply embedded within. It was only later that I realized that for anyone who in any way did not fit the narrow binary gender norms, the narrow binary gender norms that the mid-20th century American culture prescribed, the abuse, the humiliation, and the acts of violence would continue, and the violence was much worse than a mere towel snap. I was carefully taught a gender binary heteronormative way of viewing the world, and that deviating from that norm could be dangerous. I began what has been a long and continuing process of deconstructing those norms in college. In my freshman year, I changed my major from speech and rhetoric to theater. And thus, many of my friends became the theater folk. And that included a number of out gay and lesbian folks who became my friends. One friend, Richard, who I was cast in a couple of plays, invited us after rehearsal one night to go with him and a friend to the local gay bar. Before long, it became something many of us, both gay and straight, would do regularly, because at the Riviera Room in downtown Eugene, no one checked for ID. So one did not necessarily need to be 21. My then girlfriend was underage, so we became near regulars, though I held her very close to assure that no one would think I was one of them. Though my homophobia was still very much present, it had shrunk. I became increasingly comfortable hanging out with gay friends. I remember one night at the bar I encountered Doug, a former high school cross-country teammate, there with a boyfriend. We exchanged awkward hellos. I know he would not have been safely out in our old school, and that made me sad. Thank you, Richard, for that original invitation and for being my friend and my teacher. And thank you, Doug, for trusting me. Years later, a later girlfriend and I would regularly go visit friends Bryce and John. They're friends of hers who lived in Seattle for the weekend. They were a fun couple, and I really enjoyed spending time with them. One Sunday morning, we were out together for brunch, and Bryce and my girlfriend, John and my girlfriend, decided to go run an errand, and Bryce and I stayed at the table sipping our coffee. I looked across the table and I asked him simply, "How the heck are you really?" He smiled. He didn't smile. The smile faded. And he replied, "Not very well." He leaned close and he said, "Have you ever been at that place in a relationship where you reach out for your lover and they turn away? And it happens night after night after night. I knew exactly how he felt because that was the point my relationship had come to. Oh my God. Duh. His feelings were the same as my feelings. Love is love. I had already known that intellectually, but that morning I finally understood in the depth of my heart. Love is love. Heartache is heartache. It does not matter the gender of the one you love. Love is love. Thank you, Bryce, for being my friend and my teacher. Love is love. Yet for those who love the same gender or both genders have for far too long not been treated the same, and they are still not treated the same. When I first arrived over a decade ago to serve the congregation on Whidbey Island, we, as a community, were actively involved in supporting a ballot initiative to make same-sex marriage legal in Washington state. This was prior to the Supreme Court ruling. That November, we celebrated the passage of the legislation. Finally, folks had acknowledged that love is love. The battle was won. Or was it? Measure 94 was passed by 52% of the voters. 48% voted against it. Homophobia was still very much alive and well in the hearts and minds of many, and that continues to this day. While in Whidbey, I served on the board of the local chapter of PFLAG, which was the main LGBTQ plus advocacy and education organization on the island. We sponsored a session for the community called Trans 101. There I learned how nearly 5% of the population is considered to be part of those who fit under a broad umbrella of trans. This includes non-binary folks, those who live as a gender other than the one assigned at birth, and those who have begun to transition medically. 5%, by the way, is about the same portion of the population as those who have red hair. I learned a lot that day about the biology and the psychology and the reality of the lived lives of those whose identity does not fit within society's and my own, all too often out of date and narrow definitions. I had more work to do to deconstruct my own egocentric notions of normal. I learned that to be cisgendered, that is to have one's biological sex match one's psychological identity, was only one of a wide ranges of ways to be in the world. Thank you to those who offer the program for being my teachers. My understanding continued to grow thanks to spending time in a number of settings where young people who were willing to be open about explorations and honest expressions of their own reality and were in communities where they felt safe to do so. One such learning place was the opportunity I had during seminary to serve as a co-facilitator of the middle school Our Whole Lives OWL sexuality curricula here in this congregation. The curricula and the kids were my teachers, and I thank them. Another open-hearted learning place for me was the UU summer camp I have been attending nearly every summer for nearly 30 years. There I got to know young people who identified as trans or non-binary. I remember a young person, I will call them Robin, who as they grew up came to deeply understand that their assigned birth sex did not match who they knew at the core of their being they truly were. Fortunately, they lived in a supportive and open family and were surrounded by communities that supported their decision to transition and live their life as male. As a teenager, they began hormone therapy. They began regular injections of testosterone, or as Robin called it, T. We were Facebook friends, and I remember well a series of posts he made. The first was when he simply looked at the camera and said, "This is my voice after my first injection of T." A few weeks later, he posted again, This is my voice after several injections of tea. After a time, he posted again another video. This is my voice after more injections of tea. This is my voice. This is my voice. And he laughed with joy. He was elated. Finally, he could speak and hear his own true voice. This was another, oh my God, duh moment and a friggin' growth opportunity for this heterosexual, cisgendered, old white guy. Thank you, Robin, for being my teacher and for showing me and all who know you the truth of a line from a song that you can be anybody you want to be and that you need not lose yourself. I have been honored to officiate at same-sex weddings that are now the law of the land. I was honored to officiate the wedding of a young couple who identified as non-binary. They have found that their identities did not fit in either end of a binary male-female continuum. They too have been my teachers. And here in this beloved community, I have having even more teachers about love and inclusion and what it truly looks like. Here we're surrounded by teachers offering lessons about love. Here I continue what I hope will be my lifetime of learning and loving. Unfortunately, in these times, in spite of much progress and expanding understanding and acceptance of sexual diversity, there is incredible pushback. Rather than celebrating a rainbow of possibilities as to whom one might love and who one truly is, there are those who seek to impose their narrow norms on all, norms that are little changed from those taught to me in the middle of the 20th century. It seems that they would not only like to reconstruct old notions and patriarchal, heterocentric, homophobic limits and oppressions, but to put forward legislation that would codify such limitations. I am called by my faith, by our faith, to say no. Called by a faith that affirms the inherent winged dignity of all. A faith that affirms justice and equity and compassion for all. A faith that calls for acceptance and respect for all. A faith that has as its central tenet an inclusive love. Love that has existed since before the beginning and will never let go. I'm called to do what I can. And it's often small things. It's identifying myself here and in many other groups by my pronouns. Doing so reminds me, and I hope reminds others, that not all use binary gender labels. On Whidbey Island, I was proud to carry our Standing on the Side of Love banner along with my congregation in the annual Pride Parade. And in Roseburg, we're going to be doing the same thing, and we invite you to come on down in your yellow t-shirts and join us. I support with my present and my donations LGBTQ+ advocacy efforts, and in many settings I seek to decenter myself, recognizing that for too many years, straight, white, cisgendered men have often been dominant. And I support political candidates who advocate for inclusion. And I tried something new this summer, inspired by the Southern writer Margaret Rankle. For the first time in a long time, I hung an American flag in front of my house for the 4th of July with a pride flag hanging next to it. And most of all, I seek to keep my mind and my heart open to accept with love any feedback that others might give me to help me speak and act in a manner that helps all to feel included. I'd like to close this morning with lyrics of a song. It's part of a fictional story. A story about characters with diverse sexual orientation and identities. It's the musical Rent. For those who do not know it, it's set in New York City in the midst of the AIDS pandemic, and it includes multiple love stories and one heartbreaking death. The story takes place over 1 year's time, 12 months, 52 weeks. Or as the songwriter Jonathan Larson tells us, 525,600 minutes. 525,000 moments so dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? How do you measure a year in the life of a woman or a man in any life? How about love? How about love? Measure in love. Seasons of love. Measure your life in seasons of love. May it be so. Standing for our closing words of benediction and the extinguishing of our chalice. Please say these words with me. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we hold in our hearts until we are together again. Go forth each day listening and learning and living out the truth of your story. May you measure your life in love. Go in peace. Go in love.